He stepped over his own mother like she was clutter in the hallway. Elaine lay still, listening as her son said, "She's faking it. Again." The silence that followed cut deeper than the fall itself. 3 days later, he filed paperwork to take over her decisions. He didn't know she had installed a camera after that fall. He didn't know his mother was documenting everything, with timestamps and intent. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The first thing Elaine noticed was the cold. Hardwood, sharp, unyielding, pressed into her cheek. Her wrist throbbed, bent awkwardly beneath her. Somewhere, a clock ticked, but louder than that, louder than her own shallow breath, was the sound of footsteps, her son's, retreating. "Leave her," Jason muttered, voice muffled through the hallway's curve. "She's faking again." She blinked slowly, not from pain, from shock. From the echo of betrayal that cracked through her ribs more loudly than any fall ever could. Elaine didn't move. Not yet. The light above her buzzed faintly. Dust clung to its edge. Somewhere deeper in the house, a microwave door slammed. Silence. Then a soft, annoyed sigh. "Jesus, Elaine," her daughter-in-law called out, heels clicking as she approached. "You scared him again." Two hands gripped under her elbows, rougher than necessary, and hauled her upright. Elaine winced as her hip protested, but she said nothing. She let herself be shuffled to the bathroom like clutter in the way of someone else's routine. The door shut behind her with a finality she didn't expect. Elaine gripped the sink with one hand and stared into the mirror. Her face, lined but steady, stared back. A nurse for 41 years, she'd held dying hands, reset dislocated joints, and taught interns how to deliver bad news gently. And here she was, cast as manipulator, faker, burden. She dabbed a tissue under her eye. Not a tear. "Just dust," she told herself. But when she sat on the toilet lid and pulled her knees to her chest like a child, the sob came quietly, buried so deep it hardly made a sound. Her shoulders shook, but her eyes stayed dry. She'd learned long ago how to cry without leaking. That night, Elaine sat at the small secretary desk by the window with a mug of chamomile and the weight of silence pressing on her spine. The hallway stretched dimly behind her, the same one she'd fallen in, the same one he'd abandoned her in. She opened a fresh composition notebook, marbled black and white, and turned to the first page. March 2nd, 5:12 p.m. Fell in hallway. Jason walked past, called me a faker. Nora rolled her eyes, lifted me halfway, said I scared him. I said nothing. Noted dizziness lasted under 60 seconds. Chest pressure, none. BP 108/68. No visible bruising. Pain, 3 out of 10, mostly ego. She underlined ego twice, then circled it. Elaine didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how long it had been this way. When had worry turned into surveillance? When had care become control? When had Jason's glances turned from concerned to calculating? She turned her face to the moonlight and whispered, "You raised him. You can stop protecting him now." At 6:42 a.m., she slipped out of bed, brewed a pot of dark roast, and picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered for only a moment before dialing the number. A voice answered, raspy but awake. "Elaine?" "Hi, Maeve," she said. "You still consulting?" "For you? Always." "I need legal backup," Elaine said, voice level. Quietly. A pause. Then, calm and clear. "You document. I'll direct. Let's build the file." The whisper campaign started small. A cousin called, hesitant. "Elaine, sweetie. Jason said you've been confused lately. Is everything okay?" Elaine kept her voice smooth. "I'm 67, not senile, and I still balance a checkbook better than he does." But the cousin wasn't the only one. Within days, another friend from church mentioned Jason had brought up early signs of something. Something. The word hung like steam off a bitter cup. By the time Elaine's great-nephew Devin visited, she was already watching her own shadow. Over coffee, Devin slipped her his phone under the table. On the screen, A screenshot of Jason asking a legal forum how to initiate emergency guardianship for declining parent with suspected dementia. Elaine set her cup down quietly. I see. Devon hesitated. I didn't want to meddle, but it felt off. It is, she said. And you did the right thing. That afternoon, Elaine picked up the phone and called Dr. Rao, her neurologist of 12 years. The receptionist, familiar with Elaine's sharp memory and habitual punctuality, booked her in for a full evaluation with no resistance. At the clinic, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Dr. Rao walked her through a battery of tests: spatial recall, short-term memory, motor coordination, logic patterns. Read this sentence back to me, backwards. Elaine complied, flawless. Name the last 5 presidents. She added their vice presidents too, just because she could. After an hour, he smiled. Elaine, you are cognitively sharper than half my interns. And my balance? She asked. Age-onset vestibular disorder. It's manageable. But your mind? Rock solid. She exhaled, slow and even. I'll need that in writing. You'll have it by tonight. By dusk, she was home with the printout tucked into a black folder labeled in gold ink, "Serve later." She slid it into the filing cabinet behind the recipe books, locked it, and placed a small velvet sachet of lavender on top, for scent and subtext. The next morning, Jason and his wife announced they were grabbing dinner with friends across town. Elaine nodded, polite as ever. Take your time. As the door closed behind them, her composure fell away like a curtain. She walked straight to their guest bedroom, formerly her late husband's study. The air smelled of cologne and air freshener, staged clean. She opened the drawer of the nightstand, rifled past tangled phone chargers and empty pill bottles. Nothing. Then, in the closet's top shelf, inside a manila envelope marked Draft Docs, she found it. A pre-filled guardianship petition. Her name spelled correctly. Box checked. Proposed ward lacks capacity for medical and financial decisions. Jason had listed himself as primary property manager. Elaine's hand trembled, but only for a moment. She set the form back exactly where she found it, fingerprinted the envelope edges for good measure, snapped a photo with her burner phone, time-stamped and GPS tagged. Later that night, she stood by the sink, rinsing a wine glass, the water running hotter than it needed to. Jason walked past behind her, scrolling his phone, and muttered, "You should really stop using bleach. It's not great for older lungs." She turned, smiling. "Thank you for your concern. I'll write it down." And she did. On a page dated, signed, and already tucked into her legal journal. The next morning, the pantry wouldn't open. Jason had installed a keypad lock. "Just a safety measure," he said, as if she'd requested it. "You've been knocking things over a lot lately." Elaine tilted her head, smiled, and said nothing. Later that evening, she went to retrieve her blood pressure medication. It wasn't in the drawer. She searched the bathroom, the hall cabinet, the kitchen tin where she always kept her refill slips. Gone. "Where are my meds?" she asked quietly over dinner. Jason's wife, Cheryl, didn't look up from her phone. Jason waved a fork toward the utility closet. "Lock them up. We can't risk a mix-up. I've been taking the same prescriptions for 12 years. "Right. And last week you doubled up, remember?" Elaine didn't, because it never happened. She began writing again that night. A new page, lock log. She detailed the pantry, the meds, the language Jason was using, words like fragile, slipping, unsafe alone. She checked the pantry keypad model online. It could be opened with a factory reset code. She jotted that down too. By the end of the week, Jason had borrowed her car for the 3rd time. "You shouldn't be on the road," he said, keys dangling from his hand. "Your reflexes aren't great." Elaine nodded, then took a photo of the empty driveway, time-stamped it, and printed a copy for her folder. Cheryl started doing small things, hovering while Elaine cooked, putting child locks on the oven dials, whispering loudly into the phone about how it would be better if she had someone watching her full-time. Elaine didn't argue. She documented every whisper, every skipped refill, every tossed-off comment. She called Angela, her old advocate friend, the following Monday. "This is coordinated," Elaine said, her voice crisp. "I agree," Angela replied. "You ready for legal teeth?" Elaine paused, then exhaled. "Yes." Angela connected her with Althea Monroe, a legal specialist in elder coercion cases. Within days, Elaine had an intake meeting scheduled. When Althea answered the phone, she asked only one question. "Do you feel safe right now?" Elaine hesitated. "Physically, yes. Psychologically, it's like living in an unlocked trap." "Explain." Elaine didn't flinch. "It's not abuse with bruises. It's erosion. They're rubbing me down with kindness and care until I disappear," Althea replied without emotion. "We'll begin with a preemptive capacity defense. You'll need to gather receipts, prescriptions, a list of blocked access, any altered routines, financial interference, and communication manipulation. I have most of that already." "I figured you might." Elaine hung up and opened her legal journal to a fresh tab. Attorney, active. She began organizing everything. Video of Jason entering the pantry and locking it behind him. Voice recordings where he said, "It's not that she's crazy, it's just, she doesn't know what she doesn't know." Photos of the locked cabinet. Printouts of her recent neurological test showing 0 cognitive impairment. The guardianship form with his pre-signed signature. A spreadsheet tracking his mileage on her car using insurance app logs. It was all neat, precise, and devastating. Jason kept smiling at her across the dinner table, kept calling her Mom, with that patronizing pat on the shoulder. Elaine smiled back, but her mind was already somewhere else, imagining the moment the doorbell would ring with his name on the envelope. That night, Cheryl mentioned wanting to renovate Elaine's sewing room. "Could make a nice home office," she said cheerfully. Elaine blinked slowly. "Just make sure you get the permits." She added that one too, right below a quote from Jason the night before. "You won't believe how fast we could flip this place if it was just us." She sat down at her desk and reread her copy of The Power of Attorney, then picked up the pen. Click, initial, fold. The document was signed, notarized, and redirected, removing Jason entirely and assigning authority to an old friend from nursing school, someone trusted, someone quiet. Elaine stepped out to the mailbox, slipped the envelope inside, and closed the lid with a click that sounded like the start of something. Elaine watched the red flag on the mailbox settle as she turned back toward the house. Her hand lingered on the doorframe, same spot where her palm had caught nothing but air the morning she fell. She took a slow breath, walked inside, and looked down the hallway as if it were a stage. If Jason wanted to perform, she would give him a set. She placed the motion sensor camera on a small shelf, angled perfectly to catch the hallway stretch between the bedroom doors. A digital clock with date and time went just beneath it. On the entryway table, beneath the bowl of keys, she tucked a tiny audio recorder. It triggered by sound and looped every 48 hours, enough to catch what counted. She left the pantry door ajar, left the medicine drawer open, left her cane just slightly askew by the baseboard, its polished handle catching the light like bait. Then she waited. It didn't take long. On Monday, Jason's voice rang out down the hallway. "She's good at falling for attention. Should have gone into theater, not nursing." Muffled laughter followed. "Cheryl, probably." On Tuesday, he faked a limp behind her back, muttering, "Who am I this week?" "Tumble Elaine?" He snapped a picture of her pill case. "Look at this. She's gonna overdose on vitamins next." Elaine sat quietly in her chair, one hand petting the cat that didn't exist anymore, the other pressing record on her phone just in case. On Wednesday, Jason called his friend and said, "Give us a year, and this place is ours." Then paused. "She won't fight it. She's tired." That night, Elaine didn't cry. She labeled the footage and named the folder Exhibit A, Hallway Week. Then she attached it to an encrypted email and hit send. To Althea Monroe. Subject, Exhibit a message. The hallway speaks. Jason walked in minutes later. "Cheryl and I were thinking, we might turn the back bedroom into a joint office. That okay?" Elaine turned her head slowly. "Just make sure you get the permits." He blinked, smiled too wide. "Of course." She smiled back. Wider. By Friday, Jason's footsteps were familiar as clock ticks. She could hear them through walls, recognize the tempo of entitlement. She moved differently now. Calculated pauses, subtle glances, perfectly aware of what the camera would catch. Not lies, just framing. That morning, as Jason and Cheryl left for their Pilates class, Elaine walked out to the mailbox and placed one more envelope inside. A certified copy of the video footage on USB paired with her POA transfer confirmation and physician verification documents. Subject line: executed and empowered. She wiped her palms on her skirt as she came back inside. It wasn't fear anymore. It was readiness. That evening, she made tea and stood in the hallway, arms crossed, facing the place where she'd once been face down, heart pounding not from injury, but from betrayal. She glanced up at the motion sensor and nodded at it like an old colleague. "Good shift today," she murmured. At 6:37 p.m., Jason came through the door, still mid-laugh from something Cheryl had said in the driveway. As he stepped into the hallway, he froze. A man in a charcoal blazer was waiting by the coat rack, legal documents in hand, badge clipped to his collar. "Jason Hall?" the man asked. "Yeah?" "You've been served." Jason took the envelope like it might burn him. "For what?" The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. Elaine watched from the top of the staircase, silent, upright, and finally, above him. The papers hung in Jason's hand like they weighed 10 pounds. For a moment, he stood completely still. No smirk, no snide quip, just the mechanical stiffness of someone realizing the chessboard wasn't his anymore. Elaine didn't blink as she watched from the kitchen window, hand around a chipped teacup, steam curling upward like a flag raised in silence. The man in the blazer turned without a word and disappeared down the porch steps. Jason stayed frozen a beat longer before pushing open the screen door, his footsteps sharp across the hardwood. He turned the corner into the kitchen, face tight with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" he barked, slapping the envelope on the counter between them. Elaine stirred her tea slowly. 1 circle, 2. "Legal assistance," she said evenly. "The kind you should have asked for." Jason scoffed. "Elder coercion review? You're serious?" "I am." "You're out of your mind." Elaine finally looked up. "And yet my neurologist disagrees. So does the footage, and the notary, and the lawyer, and the financial auditor." He opened the envelope and scanned the top sheet. His hands trembled slightly. Across the room, Cheryl entered, Bluetooth still in one ear, acrylic nails clicking against her phone. "What is going on?" Jason waved the document. "She's trying to get me kicked out of my own mother's house." Elaine's eyebrow lifted just barely. "You mean my house?" The room fell quiet. Then Cheryl hissed, "She's bluffing. This won't hold." Elaine walked to the hallway, pulled a folder from the credenza drawer, and laid it on the table. Inside, copies of the POA transfer, notarized neurologist statements, time-stamped video stills of Jason's mocking, and the affidavit declaring her full mental competency. "You can call it bluff," she said softly. "The court will call it evidence." By the end of the day, Elaine's attorney had filed for Jason's temporary removal as caregiver, citing both psychological erosion and misuse of resources. Jason called his old college roommate, now a paralegal. No answer. Cheryl posted on Facebook, "Caring for aging parents is hard. Sometimes they turn on the people trying to help." Elaine took a screenshot and filed it in her digital folder. Narratives for review. 2 days later, the lock to the medicine cabinet was gone. So was the keypad on the pantry. Elaine walked the hallway in silence, cane tapping in rhythm. Not for support, just punctuation. Jason retreated to the guest room more often. Cheryl muttered in corners about getting a real place. Elaine changed the Wi-Fi password. When Jason tried to log in from his laptop, she heard the ping of rejection. His voice cracked through the wall. "She locked us out?" Elaine, in her sunlit reading chair, smiled faintly. "Yes," she murmured to no one. I did. On the fifth morning, a letter arrived addressed to Jason but left on the communal counter. The envelope was stamped "Notice Response Required." Elaine opened the cabinet, pulled down a fresh tin of tea, and let the water boil. Minutes later, Jason slammed through the kitchen. You think you've won something? You want to be alone so bad? Let's see what a judge says when she finds out you're unstable. Cheryl followed behind, red-faced. We're filing a counterclaim. You're delusional, Elaine. Unfit to live alone. Elaine took a sip of her tea and set the cup down with surgical precision. Good, she said. Put it in writing. The words were barely cold on the court filing when Elaine opened her laptop and typed out an email with the subject, Incompetency Counterclaim Response. Immediate action required. She didn't tremble. Not when she read Cheryl's accusation, not when she clicked send. She simply closed the lid and turned to her tea kettle. Steam whistled behind her like pressure releasing from a sealed chamber. That same day, her attorney filed a pre-response motion attaching certified neurologist records, signed therapy assessments, and a flash drive labeled Exhibit B hallway documentation, psychological manipulation, verbal dismissal, denied access, chronological order. The next morning, a notary arrived at her front door, mid-50s, gray ponytail, briefcase in hand. Elaine Caldwell? The woman asked gently. That's me. Let's make it official. They sat at Elaine's kitchen table, paperwork spread between them like a chessboard. Elaine handed over her most recent cognitive testing results, her medical team's clearance letter, and a one-page affidavit of mental capacity that she'd drafted the night before. I want every box initialed, every word notarized, she said. No margin for misinterpretation. The notary nodded. You're the most prepared person I've ever certified. Elaine's pen scratched the final signature with purpose. Good, because they think I'm faking competence. Not anymore, the notary said, sealing the document. Elaine filed the original under a new tab in her drawer, State Defense, Valid Capacity. Then she turned to the file folder she hadn't touched in 2 years, labeled in cursive, Just in Case. Inside were her old will, an outdated power of attorney, and a handwritten note her husband had left before his stroke, just a line about how she always knew what to do before anyone else did. She read it, twice, then gently slid it back. Then, she began to rewrite everything. Jason's name vanished from every line of inheritance. No executor status, no beneficiary, not even emergency contact. Instead, Elaine transferred her trust to the Elder Justice Alliance, a nonprofit that helped aging women navigate legal coercion and family abuse. She updated her healthcare proxy to her longtime neighbor, Margaret, sharp as ever and loyal to the bone. Finally, she typed a new document, Final Instructions, Elaine C. Caldwell. It included funeral preferences, estate division, and a burial plot already purchased under her maiden name. She clipped it all together in a folder and labeled it, Ready When Needed. Then came the letter. She wrote it by hand, short, surgical. Jason, you dismissed me before I was done, before you knew what I could do quietly, cleanly, and with full clarity. If you're reading this, that means you lost more than a case. You lost the assumption that I'd always bend. I didn't. I stood. Mom. She placed it in a plain white envelope and scrawled across the front, to be opened only if she wins. On Friday, her lawyer called. They've scheduled the hearing, he said. Full judicial review, and Jason is officially being investigated. Elaine didn't answer right away. She was looking at the hallway camera monitor, watching Jason step outside to take a phone call. His back was turned. For once, his shoulders weren't puffed up with performance. They really thought I'd slip quietly, she said into the phone. They always do, the lawyer replied. Elaine said slowly, smoothing her cardigan sleeves. Well, let's make this public. Elaine stood at the edge of her hallway. Again. The same hallway where Jason had once stepped over her body. Where he now stood accused of stepping over every legal and moral line. The court hearing was scheduled, the investigation was underway. But Elaine knew, if you wanted justice, you didn't just show up, You showed receipts. And so, she did. She spent 3 full days at her kitchen table, beside a fresh yellow legal pad and a highlighter. The scent of ink and lemon disinfectant filled the room, order and memory. She logged into her online banking account, clicking through the history like she was sorting puzzle pieces. It was all there. 4 years' worth of emergency errands Jason had offered to handle. $76.98, Home Depot $119, Verizon upgrade fee $33.25, Spotify premium subscription $49.95, monthly antivirus software, she didn't own a computer, $265, gas reimbursement. In a month she hadn't left town, line by line. She built the picture. $4,823.71, and not a single dollar she'd approved. She printed the statements, clipped them with a binder clip, and wrote on the cover page in clean-centered font, "Unauthorized transactions, Elaine C. Caldwell." Then she opened her call log and calendar history. Jason had marked her neurologist appointment as Mom's Cognitive Decline Follow-Up. She had passed that test with 100% clarity. She noted the discrepancy, circled it twice. At their next meeting, Elaine handed everything to her attorney. He read in silence, then nodded once. "Will escalate to financial exploitation under elder abuse statutes." Jason's lawyer, young, smug, and wearing an expensive blazer like armor, called it a classic misunderstanding between family members. Elaine tilted her head. "So is theft," she said calmly, "when you know the PIN but not the permission." The judge allowed formal mediation. Jason insisted he'd explain it all face to face. Elaine agreed, but on her terms. On the day of mediation, she dressed deliberately. She wore her late husband's old watch, its face polished, ticking steady. Around her neck was the silk scarf Jason's wife had once tried to pawn behind her back, claiming Elaine had lost it somewhere. As she stepped into the conference room, the scent of paper, stale coffee, and polished wood clung to the air. Jason was already seated, hands folded, lips tight. Elaine placed her folder on the table, unsnapped it, and said her first words, "I'm not senile, I'm systematic." Jason flinched. His wife's jaw tensed. Elaine's lawyer nodded and began distributing evidence packets. Jason's attorney launched into a practiced apology. "We understand there have been some communication breakdowns." Elaine held up a hand. "You can read the receipts, or I can read them aloud. Choice is yours." Halfway through the session, Jason leaned toward his wife and hissed, just low enough to miss the ears of the lawyers, but not Elaine's lapel recorder. "We should have pushed her sooner." Elaine didn't react. She didn't blink. She simply made a note and clicked the audio file into her Exhibit C folder when she got home. Elaine played the recording once, only once. "We should have pushed her sooner." It was Jason's voice, flat, icy, no laughter in it, just calculation. The words landed like a stamp on court paper, clear and heavy. She didn't flinch, didn't weep. Instead, she opened her laptop and attached the audio file to an email labeled "Documented Intent." "Proceed." Her lawyer's reply came back just before midnight. "This changes everything. We're filing for immediate removal." Within 48 hours, they were in court. Elaine sat upright in her pew, pressed into her blazer like armor. Across the aisle, Jason slouched beside his attorney. Less defiant now. More confused, like a child trying to guess what rule he broke too late. The judge skimmed through printouts, bank withdrawals, time-stamped surveillance, transcripts of Jason's muttering, mocking, maneuvering, mocking, isolation, unauthorized financial access, coercive control, and now audio proof of intentional harm. Jason's lawyer shifted in his seat. Elaine didn't blink. The ruling was swift and verbal. "Mr. Caldwell is to vacate the residence within 72 hours pending investigation. Any contact with Ms. Caldwell outside legal counsel will result in contempt." Jason didn't speak as they left the courtroom, but Elaine caught him glancing at her, just once, confused, like a man watching his grip slip from the edge of a cliff. 3 mornings later, the locksmith arrived in a blue van and heavy boots. "You must be Elaine," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Ready for the reset?" Elaine handed her a folded diagram. 3 locks, 1 smart keypad, new security code. "Ready," she said, and watching. As the woman drilled the old lock from its place, metal flakes curled like petals onto the porch tiles. A metaphor, Elaine thought, out with rust. When the job was done, Elaine tipped her with cash tucked into a note. "Thank you for making me feel safe in my own home." The woman read it, paused, and nodded once before driving off. That same week, Gwen arrived, her new part-time caregiver. She wore soft sneakers, carried ginger tea bags in her purse, and asked permission before adjusting anything. Gwen noticed things, like how Elaine liked the blinds half open, not all the way. She folded laundry without humming, respected silence, and never offered advice uninvited. "You're not here to fix me," Elaine said one day. Gwen smiled. "No, ma'am. Just here to witness you healing yourself." Then the text came. "Jason, you're embarrassing yourself." Elaine stared at it. Her thumb hovered, then settled. "You already tried that for me. Didn't work." She blocked him. On Sunday, she dressed for church in navy slacks and a pearl button blouse. Her walking stick clicked like punctuation against the steps as she entered the vestibule. Jason's wife was there, leaning against the wall like a vulture waiting for decay. "You think this makes you noble?" she hissed. "You're dragging the family through the mud." Elaine didn't reply. She didn't need to. Pastor Clara appeared at her side, tall and quiet until she wasn't. "This isn't the place," she said, voice calm but unshakable. "And this woman doesn't walk alone." Jason's wife backed off, red-faced, disappearing into a pew. After the service, Pastor Clara found Elaine alone in the back pew, staring at the stained glass as the light fractured in gentle pools on the carpet. "We're forming a women's group," Clara said. "Stories of survival, boundaries, resilience." Elaine arched an eyebrow. "You want me to lead one?" "You already are," Clara said. "You just haven't heard yourself speak yet." Elaine took a long breath. "I'm not a public speaker." "You're not," Clara said. "You're a public survivor. That's louder." That evening, Elaine sat at her desk, turned on her small study lamp, and pulled out a fresh journal. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the gravity of beginning something on her terms. She flipped to the first page. Session 1, Power After Silence. She wrote slowly, thoughtfully, no deletions, no erasing. For the first time in months, she felt her hands were not just holding a pen, they were holding a match. Elaine zipped up the leather binder with a finality that echoed through the room like a slammed door. The journal entries were alphabetized, the receipts hole-punched, photos laminated, audio transcripted, every page protected in a sheet sleeve, the kind used by people who never planned to lose their place again. She had started this archive after Gwen's first day, after the locks changed, after the courtroom win. But the truth was, it had been building long before that. This was not revenge. It was record-keeping. And it was airtight. She labeled the cover with her own handwriting, Hallway to Hearing, a Survivor's Archive. The sun had barely cleared the treetops when she walked into her attorney's office, binder hugged to her chest like a baby she had carried for too long. Catherine met her at the door. "You brought the file?" Elaine laid it on the table between them. "I brought the war." Catherine flipped through the binder, eyebrows rising higher with every page. "You time-stamped everything?" she said, almost in disbelief. Elaine nodded. "Down to the second." The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly as Catherine closed the binder and said, "We're taking this to the DA." 2 days later, the district attorney's office sent an investigator. A woman in her early 40s with quiet eyes and a legal pad full of notes. She sat across from Elaine in her living room, surrounded by light and quiet jazz from the record player Gwen had set up that morning. The woman asked measured questions. "Can you confirm the voice in the hallway audio?" "Yes." Did you authorize the fund transfers shown on these statements? No. Were you ever medically declared incapable of making your own decisions? Never. I brought the signed letter. She passed it across the table like a trump card. 3 days later, the DA's office filed an official financial abuse investigation against Jason Caldwell. The notification hit his email and physical mailbox simultaneously. His attorney, an expensive man with silk ties and empty reassurances, resigned within 24 hours, citing irreconcilable ethics concerns. Elaine didn't gloat. She went to her garden, watered her tomatoes, and let the hose hiss as quietly as her satisfaction. The court date arrived without a hitch. Elaine wore a navy suit and the same pearl necklace she wore to her retirement ceremony. Her hair was freshly trimmed. She carried no cane. On the stand, she spoke like a nurse reading a patient chart, measured, precise, unshakable. I experienced coercive control, she told the judge, not with fists, but with silence, with locks, with stolen passwords, with isolation disguised as care. She presented her timeline: medication restrictions, fund transfers, surveillance recordings, text messages, audio logs, laughter after her fall. Each entry had a page number. Each page was backed with evidence. Jason sat across the room, alone, jaw slack. No lawyer to speak for him now. When Elaine finished, the courtroom was still. Even the court reporter paused before clicking again. The judge folded his hands, leaned forward slightly, and said, "The court sees no confusion, only clarity from the plaintiff." A beat of silence followed. Then, "We are freezing Mr. Caldwell's accounts pending full investigation, and we will reconvene for sentencing." Elaine stood, walked out with her binder under her arm, and let the courtroom doors swing shut behind her like a final chapter. Elaine walked out of the courthouse into a crisp wind that tugged at her coat collar like a memory. Jason's accounts were frozen. The judge had said, "The court sees no confusion, only clarity from the plaintiff." And just like that, the system had spoken back on her behalf. But what mattered more was what came next. She stood taller as she crossed the parking lot. Her spine still ached sometimes, but it held. The email arrived the next morning, subject line, "Feature request, out loud after 60, podcast." A woman named Brenda had heard about the case through court monitoring records and wanted to tell Elaine's story, unedited, unsanitized. Elaine read the message twice, then clicked reply. Truth only. No tragedy porn. I'll do it. She wore slate gray slacks and her court blazer. Her voice was steady, her hands calm. She introduced herself the way Jason never had. "I'm Elaine Rowe. I raised 2 sons. I worked in trauma nursing for 38 years. I've been called a lot of things, none of them fragile." She spoke of the fall, of hearing Jason's words, "Leave her, she's faking again," while lying face down on hardwood. The silence in the recording booth was thick and reverent. "You don't need bruises to prove abuse," she said. "You just need a file and the nerve to open it." Within 2 weeks, the episode hit 40,000 downloads. Elaine's inbox bloomed, messages from strangers across the country, some shaking, some sharp. "I recorded my daughter screaming at me today. You made me feel sane again." "I didn't know what I was experiencing had a name. Now I do." A few letters came handwritten, one in purple ink. "You made me brave." Elaine read them at her kitchen table with the same care she once gave patient files, slowly, fully, without looking away. That same week, she filed to establish the Hallway Initiative, a micro-grant fund to support elder women with covert recording tools, door cams, voice recorders, timestamps. She funded the first round herself, money Jason would have inherited. Now it had purpose. She created a simple motto for the website: "If they doubt your pain, document it. If they won't listen, record it." She clicked publish without ceremony, but her hands tingled. Then she packed up the hallway camera, the one that saw her fall, the one that captured Jason mimicking her limp when he thought she couldn't hear, the one that ultimately spoke louder than she ever could. She called the local women's shelter. "I have a donation," she said. "It recorded the moment my life split open. Now want it to help someone else record the moment theirs begins again. Later that evening, Gwen arrived to check in, found Elaine on the porch with a small stack of letters beside her tea. "I keep thinking this is over," Gwen said. Elaine smiled softly. "It is for me, but not for them. Not yet." She handed her a note with a drawing of a small recorder and a heart. "Thank you for teaching me that silence isn't weakness. It's the pause before the truth." As the sun dipped behind the oak outside her porch, Elaine's phone buzzed. Blocked number. Voicemail left. No transcript available. She stared at it, unmoved, then turned her phone face down. Elaine didn't touch it. Not right away. She poured tea, steeped it longer than usual, set the mug down without sipping. Then, finally, she flipped the phone over and pressed play. Jason's voice cracked through the speaker, raw and rehearsed all at once. "Mom, I'm sorry. I know I didn't handle things well. I was under a lot of pressure. Work, finances, everything. I never meant to hurt you. Please, can we talk?" The silence that followed was longer than the message itself, then the beep. Elaine sat for a full minute, staring at nothing, hearing everything. Then she reached for the phone and with a single tap, deleted the message. No hesitation, no replay, no saving it for sentiment. Just gone. That afternoon, she walked into her study and opened her advance directive file. Pen in hand, glasses low on her nose, she added a new clause. In the event of medical emergency, no contact with Jason Caldwell unless legally required by physician's notice. She printed it, initialed the margin, and placed it in her red folder labeled "Final Say, Elaine Rowe." The paper was crisp, the signature steady. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Jason's, rounded and hurried. She didn't open it. Instead, she slipped it into a manila envelope with a post-it on top, "Case closed," then mailed it back. It was the first thing she'd returned of his that didn't belong to her in the first place. A week passed, then 2. Her porch light gleamed warm through early twilight as 3 women filed into her living room carrying notepads, pastries, and decades of buried experience. Elaine stood at the head of the coffee table like a professor at a courtroom lectern. "This is not therapy," she began. "This is survival strategy." They laughed, soft, unsure. But then the notebooks opened. Tonight's topic, red flags versus paperwork. The first salon session ended with tears, hugs, and 5 new voices ready to be louder than shame. By the end of the month, her home no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a fort. The hallway was freshly painted. The guest bathroom had new light bulbs. The kitchen knives gleamed from a new block, untouched by borrowed hands. No more side eyes over dinner, no more locked cabinets, just women, wisdom, and walls that now knew only truth. Elaine stood at the kitchen sink the following Friday, rinsing teacups from the last salon, when her phone buzzed again. This time not with Jason's name, but her attorney's. "DA's office just called," Catherine said. "They've offered him a plea deal." Elaine gripped the edge of the sink. "What kind?" "Community service and full restitution, every dollar tracked and returned." Elaine exhaled. "What does he have to do?" "Clean floors and file reports. At the Elder Care Center your camera now funds." Silence passed like thunder waiting to fall. Elaine lifted her chin. Let them put him on the schedule. The courtroom was silent as the judge finished reading the sentence. Jason Caldwell will pay restitution in the amount of $4,800 and complete 60 hours of supervised community service at a certified elder care facility. Elaine sat still. Her face didn't move, but inside something shifted, like a stone finally settling after months of pressure. It wasn't victory. It was validation. Jason sat across the aisle, head bowed, his lawyer's hand gripping his shoulder. The man who once laughed at her fall now looked like he'd been dropped into a system that finally saw him. The next day, Elaine made a single phone call. "Willow Haven," answered the shelter director. "This is Elaine Rowe," she said, calm but steady. "If you're able, I'd like Jason Caldwell assigned there to complete his hours." A pause. Then, "We've been briefed about his case. You're sure you're okay with that?" "I'm not interested in confrontation," Elaine replied. "Only accountability. I want him to serve where people still believe in healing." Jason reported for duty Monday morning. He wore sagging jeans, a hoodie, and a disposable name badge that read, "Community Laborer, Supervised Only." His assignment was basic: mop floors, sanitize walker grips, clean bathroom rails, restock gloves. He wasn't allowed to interact with residents or staff beyond his supervisor. No privacy, no praise, just labor. He didn't know Elaine had helped fund the new security cameras, or that half the cabinets bore her donation plaques, or that his mop closet had once been a makeshift office for her advocacy work. He didn't know, but he felt it. On the 5th day of his service, Elaine walked through the front door unannounced. She wore a tailored black coat and low heels. Gwen offered to drive her, but she declined. This walk, these steps, were hers to take. She moved past reception with grace, her presence drawing polite nods from staff who now knew her as more than just a donor. She didn't pause, didn't ask for directions. Jason was crouched by the wall, scrubbing scuff marks from the baseboards. He looked up. Elaine walked past him as if he were a chair or a painting she didn't care for. His breath caught in his throat. He didn't speak, and neither did she. At the front desk, she handed the receptionist a sealed envelope. Inside, a single note card in bold handwriting. "The hallway never forgets." No name, no threat, just the weight of truth, folded neatly, left behind. Outside, the breeze caught her scarf and lifted it across her shoulder. She stood on the steps for a moment, staring ahead, not at the parking lot, but at everything beyond it. Then she walked to her car and drove away. That night, back at home, Gwen arrived with a casserole and a stack of letters from the women's legal salon Elaine had hosted the week before. Elaine read them at the kitchen table. One note said, "I never thought to call it abuse, but now that I have, I can finally call it over." Another read, "My daughter stopped speaking to me after I set boundaries. Thank you for showing me that boundaries aren't betrayal." Elaine folded each letter into a folder she'd labeled simply, "Resonance." Later that evening, her landline rang. It was Janet, her longtime advocate friend. "I just spoke to a producer from The Nation," Janet said. "They're doing a special feature on elder abuse and legal reform. They want to highlight you, not the case. You." Elaine held the phone between her cheek and shoulder as she poured tea. "And what exactly would I be?" "Evidence," Janet said. "The kind that makes policy happen." Elaine set the cup down slowly. "Then let's give them the facts." The tea on Elaine's stove hadn't even started to whistle when her phone lit up with the subject line, "Request for interview, NBC NPR special, Gray Power." She stood motionless in the kitchen, steam curling from her mug, hand hovering over the mouse. Janet had warned her this might happen. "If you go national," she'd said, "don't water it down." Elaine clicked open the message. It was real. NBC and NPR were collaborating on a feature series about elder rights, and they wanted to include her. They didn't ask for a soundbite. They asked for her file. 2 weeks later, Elaine sat in a straight-backed chair beneath soft studio lights. The camera crew had tried to angle her next to a fireplace. She asked them to move it. She wasn't going to be portrayed as fragile warmth in a wool cardigan. "I'm not here to comfort," she'd said. "I'm here to clarify." The interviewer, a woman in her 40s with a sharp voice softened by curiosity, leaned forward and asked, "How did it begin?" Elaine didn't pause. "The day I was face down on my own hardwood and my son walked away." The producer exhaled, quiet. The piece aired under the segment title, "The Woman Who Weaponized Documentation." They showed court footage, affidavits, video stills. Elaine's voice narrating from her living room, her tone even and surgical. "You don't need revenge," she said over a slow zoom on the hallway camera. "You need proof." The response came like a tidal surge. Elaine's lawyer received over 70 emails in the first 48 hours. Women from Ohio, Nevada, New York, rural towns and cities, some still living in silence, others recording their own falls, some just writing, "Thank you for saying it out loud." A law school professor from Michigan emailed her directly. "We'd like to use your case materials in our Elder Justice module, with your permission." Elaine replied with one sentence, "Teach them how to stop this before it starts." NBC followed up with a second request, for a segment focused just on her file. The team was stunned at its precision. Her binders, labeled with tabs like medical records, verbal coercion, financial abuse, became the gold standard in the elder advocacy world. Law students began studying them like coursework. Advocacy groups modeled new outreach programs around the Hallway Initiative. And Jason? He lost his contracting license. Couldn't pass basic employment background checks. Every application triggered a flag for elder fraud under public review. Elaine didn't gloat. She just said, "Systems protect themselves when you show them they've failed." Her living room transformed over time. One side still had her bookshelf, old nursing textbooks, and photo frames. The other now held a printer, a standing corkboard marked "Incoming," and a small lamp with an engraved base that read, "Voice greater than permission." She'd done 6 interviews in 3 months, declined 4. "If they want a redemption arc, tell them I'm not the one," she told Janet. One evening, after recording a podcast episode on covert evidence laws by state, she walked out onto her porch and sat in the dark. She didn't light the lantern, just listened to the wind brush the trees. She turned her phone face up, checked her email. Subject, "My mom's going through this now. Can you help?" The message was from a girl in Illinois, 19, scared. Attached was a photo, her mother sitting at a kitchen table, tear-stained, one hand over a manila folder. Elaine replied in less than a minute. Elaine stared at the photo the young woman had sent, her mother hunched, hand splayed protectively over a file marked "Private" in shaky black Sharpie. The past clicked back into place like a lock that had never been fully turned. She thought of her own hallway, the floor where her body once lay cooling as her son stepped over her pain. She thought of the camera, of the court, of every woman who wrote her after the podcast aired. The next morning, she made the decision. She would turn her own home into shelter, but not just any shelter, a space born from documentation, not pity. By spring, the construction was finished. A contractor she trusted, a woman, helped convert the back sunroom into a small transitional guest suite. Clean lines, neutral walls, one framed quote in the center, "What they called delusion, we now call evidence." She named it The Hallway. Every woman who stayed received a welcome card printed on thick stock, tucked between folded towels. It read, "You are not crazy. You were unheard. That ends here." On the back of each card, a phone number, her lawyer's office. Elaine also launched a quarterly workshop in her living room for social workers and caregivers. The training was simple, sharp, and specific. How to detect psychological abuse with no bruises, how to hear silence as testimony, how to stop mistaking emotional erosion for old age. She used her own footage, her own transcripts. One trainee, a woman in her 20s with anxiety in her eyes, whispered during a break, "My grandmother went through something similar, but we didn't know what it was. We thought she was just tired." Elaine nodded gently. Tired is often what survival looks like after 100 dismissals. Her daily life softened, the old rigidity in her joints remained, but she moved through her home like someone reclaiming each square foot as holy ground. She kept the kitchen bright, sunlit and quiet. The hallway, now painted warm amber, bore no plaques or cameras. It didn't need them anymore. Every lock was removed, cabinets stayed open. Trust, like oxygen, returned unnoticed until you realized you were breathing easier. In the evenings, she wrote, the journal she'd once used for documenting abuse now bore a new title across its cover, hand-lettered in pen, Fall, Rise, Serve. It wasn't a memoir in the traditional sense, no chapters, no table of contents, just moments recorded like case notes, precise, unsentimental, permanent. March 3rd, the shelter called. They're installing their own hallway cam, Donated by an anonymous survivor. April 14th. Gwen made tea. We didn't talk. I didn't need to. One night, as the crickets chirped beyond the kitchen screen and the smell of lavender oil lingered from the diffuser, Elaine sat at the dining table with a legal pad. She was listing items for her lawyer to update in her living will. She heard the mailbox flap shut. When she opened the door, the night air was cool and crisp. A single envelope sat in the box, ivory, thick, embossed. Return address, Rowe and Kendall Legal Group. Inside was a single page. This letter confirms the final closure of all legal proceedings initiated under Elaine Rowe versus Jason Rowe. No appeals filed. All conditions met. Case closed. She read it twice, not because she doubted it, but because she wanted the ink to imprint. She placed the letter on the same table where she'd once laid her bruised pride and unopened fears. This time, it stayed open. The letter stayed on her mantel for 3 days before she framed it. Not out of pride, but out of memory. Out of the kind of truth that deserves a permanent address. The wording, black on ivory, was clinical but resolute. Civil protections granted. Case closed. Client secured. Elaine stared at it under the morning light. The ink hadn't bled, neither had she, not anymore. She slipped on her cardigan, smoothing it once down the front. Then, without ceremony, she placed the frame on the hallway shelf. The very shelf that once held her son's forgotten lunchbox. A photo of them at the zoo, a house key she never truly owned. Until now. Now she did. That evening, her home buzzed not with tension, but laughter. A long table stretched from the kitchen to the front window, where tea lights glowed in clean mason jars. Diane from the legal clinic brought peach cobbler. Gwen carried in 2 pitchers of sparkling cider. Even Pastor Clara arrived, boots polished, hands clasped. Elaine had invited everyone who helped her turn silence into a strategy. Her advocate friend, her notary, the paralegal who assembled the binder, the neighbor who wrote an affidavit without being asked. They ate slowly, gratefully. They toasted with chipped glasses. To the ones who document, Clara said, raising her cup. And endure. And rise, Elaine added. Heads nodded. Someone whispered, Amen. After dessert, Elaine stood up slowly, not because of pain, but because it felt right to let the room hush. I just wanted to say, she began, this home was once a stage for doubt, for being doubted, dismissed, but now it's something else. She placed a hand lightly on the wall. He tried to erase me from this house, she said, so I wrote him out of the law. There were no tears, just quiet. That sacred, air-thick kind of quiet that follows truth. The guests left in pairs, softly, reverently. Elaine washed the dishes by hand. She always did. The warm water helped her wrists, and the repetition reminded her of nursing shifts long past. After she dried the last fork, she turned off the kitchen light and moved toward the hallway. It looked different now, not because the paint had changed, but because she had. No fear, no cameras, no mockery waiting around the corner, just the sound of her slippers on hardwood. She reached the end of the hall and paused. Then she walked back the other way. Slow, straight, tall. She didn't stumble. She didn't look over her shoulder. There was no witness. No need. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, likely a scam or spam or maybe someone looking to turn her into a mascot. She ignored it. But her inbox chimed next. Subject. Thank you. You changed my mother's life. Attached, a photo of a smiling woman in a cardigan standing in front of a new deadbolt with a small card tucked into her doorframe. It read, You are not crazy. You were unheard. Elaine exhaled, saved the photo in a folder called Echoes. Later that day, she returned to the frame in the hallway, straightened it, wiped one invisible smudge, and whispered, That's the last paper I ever wanted to win. Outside, a breeze rustled the oak tree that had stood through every season of her rebuilding. She stepped out onto the porch with her tea, looked up at the sky that had never asked her to justify a single bruise, and let the sun hit her face. No makeup, no armor, just peace. She took one long breath and walked back inside, back through the hallway. This time, without hesitation,